Welcome once again to our presentation. This is another TAP QA webinar, and today we are going to cover AI and machine learning in a Selenium world. And here to lead our presentation today is Mike Wagner. So Mike, I'll give you a few minutes to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Kirk. Yeah, my name is Mike Wagner. I'm a test architect at TAP QA. I've been in the business for about 13 years now, in roles ranging from software tester, engineer, and my current role as an architect. I actually became fascinated with AI a while back. I was digging through some logs, hours of logs actually, and trying to track down an error. And as I was tracking down this error, I realized that the data in the logs that I was coming across actually would translate really good to test cases. But the problem there was that if I were to manually automate those test cases, the ROI on that work effort would be very low. So I opted to not do that. But then later on, I was reading an article on AI, and I realized that using AI as part of a resource would be a good option to be able to actually do that through that phase. So ever since then, it was actually just a spark that got me going on AI, and it's something I'm super passionate about right now. And for a fun fact, I'm super obsessed with collecting video games. I'm that guy that will go buy like 5 brand new video games and then put them on my shelf, and I'll never touch them again. But the satisfaction of knowing that it's on my shelf is just good enough for me.
Well, and you say collecting video games, you kind of mean some of the like older types as well, right? Like kind of going back a few generations of systems.
Yeah, I'm kind of a nut for Sega Genesis games and Super Nintendo games, but it's kind of just my external hobby that I like to waste money on.
Oh, hey, as a guy who collects records for a living, I totally know where you're coming from. So sometimes it looks cooler on the shelf than actually using it. So
Absolutely.
no, that's great. Hey, before we get started, I also wanted to just really quick about TAP QA. We'll only spend a couple minutes here, but we are one of the country's leading QA and software testing services organizations. Experts with everything QA. Really we specialize in staff augmentation. I know right now with, kind of what we're all going through right now and a lot of work from home and remote testing efforts, we've been able to help a lot of our clients and certainly have been taking a lot of calls lately on how to do just that with some extra helping hands during this time. Happy to help there. And again, we're huge proponents of test automation and really what AI can enhance what we do as QA professionals. We always like to think that AI, it's really here to help us out. It's not here to ultimately replace jobs. It's really here to help QA professionals focus on the things that are most important, taking the redundant tasks away from what we do on a day-to-day basis and really allow us to focus on more of the important things. So, and a fun fact about us, we just turned 10 years old last week. So we are officially double digits now as far as age. So I guess we'd be in like 3rd grade if we were a kid. And I say that because I have a 3rd grader myself. So, or maybe a 4th grader, I guess, I have to do the math there. But anyway, check us out, tapqa.com. You can learn a little bit more about us. And now we'd like to learn a little bit more about you as well. And this is really helpful for us as we know who we're speaking to and who our audience is, so we can make sure we're addressing the things that you are here for, that you want to find out during our presentation. So I think for starters, and I'll launch a poll here. We just have 2 questions just to get to know you a little bit better. What is your current role within your organization, and what is your current comfort level, experience level with artificial intelligence? We don't want to assume that everybody is a beginner. We don't want to assume that everybody is an expert. So as you can see, hopefully you can see that there's a poll up now in front of you. If you could answer those questions. And I don't see any answers coming in. So, oh, there we go. Okay, good. You might have to go to the polling section to be able to see these. But yeah, again, this is really helpful for us just to know a little bit more about our audience. So why don't we I'll give maybe about 30 seconds to complete these answers. And I do have someone from the chat room saying they're not able to submit. So not sure why that would be, but we do have a little over half the audience able to submit. So there might just be a setting. Oh, go ahead and scroll down. So thank you for those in the chat room helping us out here. So We'll get a, just kind of an overall, from what we're seeing. And you have to answer both questions. Yeah, so there's two questions on the same box. So again, yeah, thanks for everyone for entering into the chat room to help out. I'm going to end this poll, and I will share the results with everybody here just so you can all see who the audience is today. So a lot of test automation engineers and architects, so more of a hands-on audience or QA practitioners. We have a couple of others. If you did put other, just curious as to what other means. It's always good to know. And then also QA leadership and software development leadership as well. So we welcome all of you, great audience and a great spread of experiences here. And then current level of expertise with AI. The majority say brand new and don't really have AI experience. Others say conversational knowledge of AI, but haven't really used it yet at work. That makes up the vast majority here. We have two folks that have said they've explored AI tools and techniques, so have gotten a little bit more hands-on experience, and then one each of someone who is very comfortable with AI, and then one person here who it's a major part of their day-to-day role, so certainly to be considered an expert. So we hope that we can touch on things to keep everyone to give everyone a chance to learn here today. So other questions is Mike just popped up. For those using AI and those who, the few of you that have some experience, would love to hear the examples of what you've done so far in the chat room, just to kind of share with others here what your experiences are. And then also, what are you hoping to get out of today's session for everybody? Some specific points that you'd like us to hone in on. I'll share a few of those pieces here before we get started. So feel free to enter that into the chat room. We have one who said, I have created a model which predicts spams for any new email data. So using AI for something like that, that's a great application.
That's really cool.
We have one kind of request of what they're hoping to get out of today's session, and that is to know the scope of AI for the test automation realm. So that's a big portion of what we'll be talking about today, Mike.
Yep, okay.
Great, so we feel free again to keep using the chat room for requests, for questions, for the Q&A. Mike, with that, I'm gonna turn it over to you to get right into today's presentation.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, today, in today's presentation, we are going to be looking at AI to gain a general understanding of what AI is and how AI can be used to enhance our existing automation frameworks. We will be talking about machine learning and deep learning techniques and how they are used to create models that can be consumed by our existing frameworks, with a specific focus on convolutional neural networks. Then we'll discuss the approach of integrating the convolutional neural networks into existing Selenium page object model framework. So to begin this, we're going to talk about what is AI, right? The term AI is a pretty broad term. If you ask one person, they might tell you that it's autonomous driving. If you ask another person, they might tell you it's Siri. If you ask a third person, they might tell you it's Terminator from the movies. The point being is that AI in general is interpreted different ways by a lot of different people. But when it's more commonly used when describing the ability that allows a computer to imitate human behavior. The term AI isn't new. It's been around since the 50s. The original principles still apply today, along with the many new principles that have been added since its conception. So the third topic is pretty big, right? Is AI a hyped up buzzword? And this is actually a pretty complex answer. So a lot of the stuff around AI is kind of, when you first hear about AI, you're like, oh, is this going to replace my current automation engineer team? Or is this going to replace, kind of similar to like what, when Selenium came around the first time, everybody was thinking that it was going to replace the manual testers, but that's not really the case. I think AI in general should be looked at as a tool to be added to your automation toolbox. So a tool that can enhance your existing Selenium framework until it matures further. So there are many kinds of AIs that actually utilize a thing called neural networks. Neural networks are made up of a set of algorithms that are loosely modeled after the human brain. So basically, A neural network is made up of tons of little neurons, and each neuron holds a data set point, and those data set points talk to other neurons. So the example here would be the input layer, the hidden layer, and the output layer. And that's an example of an artificial neural network. So the next thing we're going to talk about is kind of the different levels of AI. So there's artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning. Artificial intelligence is, like we talked about in the previous slide, any ability that allows a computer to imitate human behavior. Machine learning is the ability to learn without explicitly being programmed. And deep learning extracts patterns from data using neural networks. So what we're going to kind of talk about now are some options. So one form of machine learning that we can use that can integrate well into our existing frameworks is reinforcement learning. When I speak about reinforcement learning, I'm talking about test coverage, right? So reinforcement learning is basically the concept of the model learns by the actions that it's performing. So in order to get the best outcome. So basically, when you start at the beginning and you have a goal at the end, it uses what's called a Q function, which is a state and an action, to calculate a Q value, which basically it determines when you move forward, the highest Q value is the option that it's going to select. So in our example below here with the arrows, if my next move forward had a high Q value, it would select that. If the Q value was low, it wouldn't select that. And again, this is a great scenario for setting up test coverage of trying to find the best routes to get to the end goal. A form of neural networks we can use is convolutional neural networks. And this is something that we're going to actually take a deeper dive into in the coming slides. So what neural networks does for you is it gives your automation framework the ability to see the web page. So it actually allows your framework to gives it vision to be able to see what elements it's actually trying to select. Obviously, that's the highlight next is the element selections can be based off a label that you pass to the model. One really cool factor is that the convolutional layer and the pooling layer is considered a feature extractor. So basically, this is where it does all the cool magic that we'll talk about in a couple slides. But the really cool thing about this feature is that you don't have to just be tied to one output, which is the fully connected layer and the output layer. You can actually change that out and use classification or detection or robotics, which is a pretty cool feature as far as this neural network goes. So what is a convolutional neural network? We'll kind of walk through the workflow of a convolutional neural network and the layers of each one and kind of explain those. All right. So the first layer is the input layer. And this can be considered the data set. So say you have like a huge folder of thousands and thousands of images of cats and dogs, and you want to tell, when you pass it to the model, what the difference is between the cat and the dog. So this data set would basically be a collection of different sizes and variations of cats and dogs. So the convolutional layer is basically the filter. So this is actually where we apply weights to the images that are being passed to the network. This is our neuron. Then we also have the pooling layer. So that's part of the feature extraction layer. So the feature extraction part, those two layers together combine that. And the pooling layer is basically downsampling it. So lowering the bit rate so you can ease the tension on the computation. And then we have the fully connected layer. And this is where you actually apply labels to the images that you passed in. So if I had labels for cats and dogs, I'd want to apply the labels to the images of cats and apply the labels to the images of dogs in a nonlinear fashion. And then finally, we have our output layer. Our output layer is what we really care about actually as testers, mainly because this is where it actually comes out with the model that we're going to consume into our existing testing framework. So I'm going to deep dive a little bit more into the convolutional neural network, or the convolutional layer, and kind of give you an example of what's happening inside that layer. So on the left, we have a grayscale image of an apple. And the computer doesn't see the apple. The computer sees a grayscale image of the grayscale numbers. And on the right is our example of what the convolutional layer is actually doing. So the green area is the image of the grayscale apple, and then the yellow is actually the filter that's being applied. So that filter will slide across the input image, element-wise multiply, and then add the outputs to a convoluted or a feature set basically. So it's going to apply weights to each of the filter sections that it slides across. And this will help us determine the features of the picture. So now that we have a better understanding of convolutional neural networks, you don't have to, I don't expect you guys to fully understand them yet, but you just kind of have the basic concept of what it's doing. So you're passing it an image, and you're going to send it through the convolutional layer where it's going to actually extract the features of that image, and then you're going to apply labels to those. And then the output would obviously be the model. So now that we have that under our belt, we're going to actually start talking about existing automation frameworks. So Selenium has a ton of different frameworks that we can utilize, right? We have data-driven frameworks, keyword-driven frameworks, etc. The one we're going to focus on mainly is the page object model, or POM as it's commonly referred to. So POM, the reason we're choosing this is because POM frameworks are extremely popular inside the test automation space. And that's with good reason, because it's been around forever. It's had an opportunity to mature in several different development life cycles. It's easy to read, it's understandable, it's scalable. It encourages reusable code via the page object models. So what I'm going to talk about here is we're actually going to just kind of give the architecture of what what a page object model is fairly briefly, just so you can kind of understand where a convolutional neural network would fit in there. So the first step, we have the test scripts. It's where we write our steps. Those steps call to the page object so we can get our defined elements and move forward to final web pages and run our tests on the web browser. So we're going to quickly deep dive into the page object class, just because I want to make sure everybody has an understanding of the page object class so that way when we later on in the slides show the CNN version of it, it'll make a little bit, the changes will make a little bit more reasoning. So the first thing we have in our login page file is our defined web elements at the top of the page. So this is where we define them via the ID or the XPath. It's a fairly standard spot to put them, and it's a fairly standard practice. But the important thing is that we have to define these each time that we write a new test that includes a new web element. Below that, we have our page object class. Inside that, we have our test methods and our actions. So in a best practices scenario, obviously our test methods would call our web elements, and we wouldn't really need to write a whole lot of custom code in each test method. But in the real world, we do actually have to do that. So there might be a scenario that for some reason I can't call the web element that I defined above. So maybe I have to run it through like a list of elements to find something specific to be able to select, as an example. So obviously, there's some scenarios here that could cause high maintenance risk areas, right, for everybody. And those high maintenance risk areas are obviously the defined web elements. Say a developer changes the ID or the XPath, or for some reason a portion of your web page isn't defined by your team and is changed out externally, you'd have to update your web pages or your page objects constantly to try to keep up with that. The second part is the test methods, right? So that's the custom code I was talking about. Even though it's not best practices, it happens all the time, right? I've seen it a lot. So the point of that being is that those are also spots that may require maintenance in the future. So how do we fix this, right? We need to give our framework vision, right? Because right now, our framework only knows what we're telling it. We're defining all of our elements inside of the page object. We're not letting the framework tell us what the elements are, because that doesn't make sense, right? But right now, the only way that we would lower our maintenance expectations on the page objects would be to be able to have the framework see the web page. That's where Selenium plus convolutional neural networks comes in place. So adding the convolutional neural network allows us to do is allows for element selection based on the label passed to the test script. So if I pass it a label of a cat and I have an image of a dog and a cat on the web page, I want it to select the cat. I don't want it to select the dog. So that's what that label is doing. I want to say select cat. What this obviously does for us is it no longer requires us to define an element within the page object class. And it also, by doing so, reduces our overall maintenance of the page object class. So our defined elements, our test methods with custom code, and our actions. So right here is an example of the same type of POM architecture, but with including a convolutional neural network. So what you can see is that not much has really changed, right? So our test scripts are still calling our lists. The only thing that will change in the test scripts is that we'll pass a label to the page object. And then in our middle layer where our page objects are stored, we're actually going to call a generic method, which is going to then call a classification method based on the label that we passed it from the test scripts. And that classification method is important because that's where we actually load our CNN model that we generated before. And then past that, again, nothing has changed. We'll move to the web pages. So as before, we're going to jump into the CNN POM class, and we're going to kind of explain that hierarchy a little bit more. So if you remember before in our POM class hierarchy structure, we had defined web elements at the top. Now that's replaced by a classification method. And we still have our class. And instead of test methods, we have our generic methods. So those generic methods are basically our Selenium actions. So like our click, our select, our text, our custom actions that we want. And what we do is we pass our label to those generic methods. And then those generic methods via the actions pass what element we want to select to the classification via a list of elements. So for the following example, I'm going to kind of walk through a Pseudocode version of what you would need to do to integrate a CNN model into the actual structure. So the very first thing is, the very first example is from our test script. So this would be a simple call to select an element, and then that label would be what we want to select. So for example, if I wanted to select the cat, I would put cat where label is. That would send to our generic test method that's in our page object. We would pass the label. We would then generate a list of elements that are from the page. So we would send all the elements that are from the page to the classification method. In the classification method, we would load our model, our CNN model that we generated before, and then we would loop through the elements until the model was able to find a match for the label. Now, obviously, this is Pseudocode, so this isn't all the code that you would need, but this is the general idea of it. And then once it returns the element that we passed in the label, you would then perform the Selenium action on it. So what we solved by adding a CNN to our POM framework is basically we were able to lower some of our maintenance risk significantly. I'm not going to claim that this is going to replace all of your maintenance on the page object, just lower it, right? So there may still be times where you would require to write some sort of, or define some sort of web element, et cetera. But for the most part, you should be able to no longer need to define your web elements and no longer need to do custom work within the test methods, or at least utilize the CNN network to do that for you. It also improved the turnaround of generating new test cases. So when you get a new test case, you no longer have to go and look up the element and try to find the XPath and find the ID for it, and then add the definition to the page object, and then write a test method for it. You would be able to simply pass the label from the text or the test scripts to the page object class. So getting started. So open source tools that you can use to help you integrate AI into your existing frameworks today are some of the most common ones is TensorFlow, which I highly recommend, and Keras, and as well as PyTorch. Getting started. Okay, so what to look for. So what I'd hope for you to take away from today is that you would want to build your own convolutional neural network. And I'm not saying that it's a lot more easier than it is complex. So the only reason I suggest or encourage you to, after today, to go out and build your own is because it's actually it is a lot more clarifying when you do it hands-on with it. So it's really not that hard. It's actually pretty fun to put together a convolutional neural network. And there's a lot of great tutorials on how to do that. And currently right now, the main language in doing that is in Python, but you can also do it in other languages like C# and Java. Remember that so when you're running your convolutional neural network, a big quick tip is that if your accuracy is coming in low, is to, you're allowed to easily tweak your model and try it again. it might be just the fact that you need to add more or less epochs to your run, or to your iterations, or you may need to add or remove layers from your neural network. The other recommendation is to get comfortable with TensorFlow. TensorFlow is a fairly common usage, and there's a lot of really great documentation out there, but getting an understanding of how that works and what the power that it can provide your network is really important. And the last item as far as what to look for is to think simple. When you're dealing with neural networks, it's super easy to overcomplicate the complicated, right? You're thinking AI in general as a topic is complicated, but the concept isn't that complicated. And what I don't want you to do is to over think what you're doing or what you're trying to achieve. So in this scenario, we're trying to lower maintenance with the page object model. And that was really the only goal of adding the convolutional neural network. But if you were to like back up and try to expand upon that, then it can get really convoluted and very complex for yourself.
Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
really quick, just wanted to touch on a couple of specific questions from our attendees, one of which was just kind of at at a higher level. If you have any recommended sites or resources for the tutorials, any, maybe one or two websites that you typically get started with?
So as far as tutorials for creating the convolutional neural network, I do have them. I can't think of them off the top of my head. So if you wouldn't mind just emailing me privately, I could absolutely get you a response to that. The other great, one of the good things right now about everybody being remote and everything like that is a lot of colleges are actually putting their courses online. So you can view Stanford or MIT. All of their intro to deep learning classes are fantastic. I highly recommend them. But as far as like specific tutorials, I can definitely provide those, but I don't have those off the top of my head.
Sure, sure. And then another question, just in regards to TensorFlow, since you've shown an affinity towards that in particular. I mean, what does TensorFlow do better than some of the other possibilities that are out there?
Well, TensorFlow is Google backed. So there's a lot, the documentation around TensorFlow has been fantastic as far as needing to understand really the most important thing when you're dealing with something that you've never dealt with before is documentation, right? So having the ability to be able to look up in the documentation questions that you have, or search, because it's widely used, you can search and find answers to some questions, has been like an eye-opening experience compared to the others.
Okay, great. And we do have quite a few other questions that were asked closer to the beginning of the conversation here today. So we can kind of dive into that. And this is a good opportunity for everyone, if you have additional questions, to enter them into the Q&A section or the chat room. So we'll start out just with some of the ones that were kind of asked earlier on as you all are thinking of other questions to ask. A really good one that I saw from the chat room is, at what phase in automation can we start with AI implementation?
Right, so that's a great question, and that's a great way to phrase that. So the really important thing is that you can take AI components and integrate them into your existing frameworks right now. There's really no like, oh, we've gone too far, we can't implement that. That's one of the common misconceptions, is that our team isn't ready for AI, or we can't move to the AI. I think what would really depend on you being able to include AI into your current existing frameworks would be getting that model generated, right? So you would want to work with your developers or with your data science team, or obviously not every company has those, but you really want to work on getting that model generated, because the work after that model is generated is fairly straightforward. It's really just replacing components of your page object with connecting it up to that model.
Okay, great. This is again a great opportunity for people to enter in questions, and I see that quite a few of them are coming in. So we'll give you all maybe a minute or two more. And a great discussion here today, Mike, and a great opportunity for us to kind of answer questions directly, as opposed to just kind of a brain dump presentation. So I love the interactive nature of this. Really quick, beyond this conversation, as I think you showed the slide before, but this is where TapQA can really help out. Our AI test professionals certainly are great with this. I know, Mike, you have a real passion around this. What are some other things that we can do to help out as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can always, we do offer a free 1 hour consultation. So we're around AI specific stuff to your environment. So, and that's really important just to kind of get a feel and to kind of get a vibe for where you're at. Cause you might be like a little, not self-conscious, but not sure if AI can even fit into your environment. And that's really where we can come in. So sometimes we could come in and say that you don't have the resources to be able to generate that model. That would be a significant thing that we'd want to help you with. We'd also want to help with building your strategy to be able to incorporate it into your existing frameworks as well, right? So today I showed the intro version of that where we're just replacing page objects with a convolutional neural network, but there's also a lot heavier stuff with, or not heavier stuff, but a little bit more test coverage style stuff with reinforcement learning, right? How we integrate that into our frameworks as well. So we also offer that. So so I mean, if you want to set up a consultation, obviously you can reach out to me or Kirk or TAP QA in general. But the real point of us in the AI team that we have at TAP is to really kickstart your AI efforts, right? So it's like I said, it's a broad term and it's used all over the place, but that's really our point.
No, that's great. And again, I think what we've seen from working with AI for a while now is that it shines when it frees up members of your team, members you're bringing onto the team to focus on more pressing issues, to focus on end user satisfaction, as we've talked about in other webinars, how the QA profession, really the focus now is on making sure your customers enjoy what they're using, that it's a very usable product. And QA has such a big role in that now that it just really frees up the time from a lot of the redundant tasks. And that's where AI really, really shines. So we're happy to help build a strategy out for your organization, for your teams. Just let us know. Just reach out and we're happy to do that. So diving in now to the Q&A, we have a lot of questions, Mike. So I'm going to just dive right in.
All right, I'm going to take a sip of coffee real quick.
One of the questions that we had early on was just, what is a good framework? It's kind of a general question, but I think, one that we can kind of expand on. What's a good framework to build AI testing systems on?
So you're saying like just a general automation framework?
Automation, or just, I think a framework in general. I mean, yeah, but I assume they mean automation framework.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously page object one is the ideal one for convolutional neural networks, mainly because that's tied around element selection. There's really some scenarios where you could use reinforcement learning with unit tests, or like my example at the beginning, right? When I was diving through those logs and I was seeing all the data points that would be valuable to a unit or integration test, or even edge cases or general testing, but the ROI return on those weren't valuable. So I think when you approach like AI specifically for like reinforcement learning, you'd want to make sure that that's your test coverage, right? Those are your poorly ROI return value tests that you can't spend time automating, but are valuable on edge cases. So I think it can really, the highlight right now, obviously for me, is the page object model. And I think that would stick around with that, but data driven would obviously be a huge one to work with as well.
Okay, great. What are in this, I mean, the answer could be any kind of application, I guess, but are there some types of applications that are better than others that would be good candidates for the artificial intelligence testing model?
Sure. So there's a lot of websites obviously have similarities, and it's all dependent on the framework that's set up. But I would say obviously mobile has a very good head start on where AI is at within testing. Web is really kind of trailing behind mobile. And I think that web applications are kind of starting to catch up with mobile at a certain point. But I would say right now the best one is probably mobile because it's just matured a lot longer, followed by web because that's bringing it up. But the point is that with the frameworks like data-driven and module and hybrid frameworks, those can all be applied to different styles of applications, right? Native and web and mobile. So really it's dependent on the framework less than the application.
Okay, no, that's great to know, Mike. Still have a few more questions trickling in and everything. So again, if you have one at the top of mind, please feel free to enter that into the chat room or the Q&A section. One thing, and this really goes to the creation of an AI strategy, or how to identify what's best for AI, what's best for us as QA professionals to still do ourselves on a manual basis. I mean, what are some of the kind of best practices at a 10,000 foot level of how you identify what scenarios and what test cases what should be tested by AI and what's compatible for AI?
Sure. So right away, I would say targeting high maintenance areas would probably be the best return on investment right away. Obviously, because you don't want to spend, I don't want to say useless hours, but countless hours refactoring your code to get it to work again when it should just work. The second part is you want to, you just kind of want to focus in on, like, it depends also what kind of like neural network you're using or machine learning technique you're using. But you want to also focus in on where your return of investment is, right? So you want to make sure that you're not just throwing AI in to throw AI in, right? Because that doesn't really make sense. You want to throw it in to add value to your team. So you want to look at scenarios and tests that would actually add value to your team, but that might not be feasible to automation engineers spending time doing it. So like I said, test coverage is huge. Trying to tie up your test coverage with logs is a pretty major effort right now. And I think that's where a lot of teams get a lot of value out, is because sometimes a lot of teams don't actually understand the logs that I mean, they understand them, but there's just such a breadth of amount of logs that they don't have time to dig through every single log to run through that. So that's where AI in the form of reinforcement learning could really benefit a team.
Oh, great. Is there a noticeable difference in performance or execution time when running tests using this versus the traditional page object model approach?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. So for sure, when you're creating the CNN model, that takes quite a bit of GPU power to actually generate the model. But once you have the model generated, you can either set it up on a server or create your own server instance of it, or you can actually even run it locally if you wanted. But as far as the test time, it does take a little bit longer, because what you're doing in the scenario that we ran today is basically it takes a list of the elements on the page and then it passes it to the model, and then the model iterates through the elements until it finds the right element. That's not to say that in the future that's not eased by some other different method, but right now it definitely does take a little bit longer for the test to run, just because it has to iterate through the elements till it finds the right element to select.
Okay, great. And as we're going through the answers, if there's anything that we can expand upon, feel free to add that into the chat room or the Q&A section as well. These are great questions, and we have a lot more coming in. So could a well-trained neural network develop its own new scripts? And if so, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an option as well. So I've never worked in that scenario, but I know that there's options like natural processing language or script generation that way. So these neural networks are designed to be able to work together. So I would say that's definitely possible, and it is possible. I've just never personally worked in that. So if you want to send me like a personal DM about more specifics on it, I could probably help you through it, but I couldn't give you a proper answer on that.
Okay, great. And that's one that we can, certainly follow up with you afterwards on. I think just, as folks are getting into AI and really getting interested in AI and, want to, pursue this potentially, beyond just curiosity, how much math is required? I mean, do you have to really have a strong background with math, with calculus, with statistics, probabilities, anything like that? Or is the barrier to entry, a little bit lower than that?
Right. So that's what I thought too, because personally, I'm not the best at math. I use my calculator for everything. But realistically, from a tester standpoint, the model has already been generated. So you wouldn't really need that much math as far as integrating it into your Selenium project. The math and stuff comes in when you're creating your own algorithms. So there's definitely a big math piece to actually generating the model from the neural networks or the machine learning that you're using, just because you have to generate and create those algorithms. So there's definitely some heavy math on the generation of the model side, but not so much on the integration into your Selenium framework. And I want to also highlight though that a lot of these, like when I was talking about TensorFlow and all those open source tools, a lot of those tools do a lot of that for you. So that I don't want to freak you out and be like, oh, I don't know math, I can't generate my own model. That's not true. You can use existing open source tools to amend that if that's a problem area for you.
Oh, great. And getting back to convolutional neural networks, if one wanted to just start it up, just build their own, and we've talked a little bit about this, but how challenging is that? I mean, is that something where, you really need to take a few cracks at it? Or as you mentioned, I mean, just some of the things you can do to kind of keep it simple, that someone could get one up and running pretty quickly?
So I would say that within, depending on the person, if you were an expert at what you're doing or you're very high level, it would probably take, a couple days, maybe a day. But if you were somebody who likes to learn like at a different pace and you want to do it across, it could take you a week or two. But the important thing is that why I suggested and encouraged people to go do a tutorial of it, because the tutorial like lengthwise is probably, I don't know, 3 hours, but the overall, you'll probably back up and reread stuff all the time. But overall, I think that process kind of gets your brain moving, and as far as like turning the right gears, as far as seeing, okay, this is where my element would be instead of this image. I would be passing a image of an icon or something like that. So it's just kind of a good opportunity, a good thing to do is to follow a tutorial. So I think my personal opinion, it wasn't overly difficult setting it up, but I think that if you follow the tutorial and you run into issues or anything like that, obviously, again, you can reach out to me with any questions that you have. But I don't think that it would be very difficult overall.
And we've had a few questions about specific tutorials. Mike, what we can do is we send a follow-up email to everyone, is perhaps we can put together a listing of specific things or area or, websites that you would turn folks onto, YouTube videos, whatever the case may be. For those that are still listening, I mean, would that be helpful? I mean, feel free to, use the raise your hand or, type that into the chat room. Yeah, we have quite a few. So, okay. That's definitely something that we can put together. So
absolutely,
we'll do that. I have a question from the Q&A room. So can you show some examples for page object model elements with labels, and what elements and labels were used?
Sure. So, well, I don't have the example on my computer, but if you reach out to me, I can definitely send you some snippets of code that will get you started. I could back up to the example. I did give a brief pseudocode example. So when you're asking, can you restate the question just so I fully understand?
Yeah, sure. So can you show some examples for page object models elements with labels, and what elements and labels were used?
Right. Okay. So for the example that we were doing here, so the element here that we're trying to look for and select in the pseudocode is actually called, I'm just using a generic term for label, but that label would actually just be a string you'd be passing. So that label would be actually, like in my example, I use cat, right? So I'm looking for an element that I know is a cat, right? And so I send the test method, my select element with cat label, and then it goes to the select element test method with that label of cat. So that's my label. And then underneath that is when I actually generate the list of elements and pass that generated list of elements from the web page that I'm on with the label of cat to the classification method. And in that classifier, we will load the model, the CNN model that we generated. And then we will go through an iteration of looking for the element that matches that cat label. And once we find that element, we'll return the element back to the select element method and click it. So this is pseudocode. So again, if you want like actual snippets and stuff like that, please, you'll have to contact me directly. But that's kind of what we have prepared. Does that help? I don't know who answered.
Yeah, I guess, and I'll leave that up to the individual who asked the question. But that's definitely, I mean, we have names that we can follow up with too on that. So another question. and I'll go through this and I'll have her elaborate if necessary. But the framework that I am currently working on uses page object model, but also goes further and creates test elements, or that has created test elements that represent the different elements on a page. So as an example, a text edit box has a test element that represents it. So selecting the element and interacting with that element are all a part of that test element object. So the code to interact with the text box is not being repeated in every page object model. Now, how do you see AI working in that case?
So you're saying that you have a test method that has I'm just going to say it out loud to clarify it. So you're saying you have a test method that has custom code to select a text box? Oh yeah, I suppose this isn't live, so you can't talk.
Sure, no, and I can, I put that into the chat room, and actually for all attendees to see that as well.
Right. So I think in the scenario, please correct me if if whoever asked responds. But I think in that scenario, so you have that custom code, you're still probably calling a generic element to actually get the selection of the test or the text box would be my suggestion. I guess I think maybe whoever that is can actually contact me directly as well. But in that scenario, I think that it all depends on how you're actually selecting that text box, right? So I don't know what your code looks like, but I would assume that if it's all within the test method, there's some way that you're calling a web element to be able to point to that at least. And then you might, I don't know what iteration you're doing to actually select it. So I'd have to actually look at the code for that.
Sure. Okay. And that's, again, some of these individual questions we can answer directly as well, of course. So we have another question. A need in my automation space is to run the same tests across desktop browsers and various iOS and Android devices. I automate it once on the desktop and want it to be able to execute across all the configurations possible. However, there are various screen sizes for the computer vision module to process, and it doesn't find the element I give it due to scaling on many occasions. There's also a landscape and portrait views to take into consideration. So is there any way around this, or is there a module I may not be aware of? And I just put the question again in the chat room for everyone to see.
Sure. So this is geared more towards non-AI, or is he wondering, are they wondering how to incorporate AI into that scenario?
Is that, do you feel that's a possibility that they could incorporate AI, or, how best to do that?
Well, it depends, I guess, on what they're using to go across browser. They could be using Appium, so that Appium has its own built-in AI plugin that you could use. Or it really depends on what they're using as far as if they want to integrate AI into that scenario. But I guess, well, I'm just trying to figure out what the question was as far as what he was asking, or what they were asking.
Sure, and maybe we'll have Jade, if we could have kind of to expand on that a little bit. Certainly we can try to tackle that. One question we got is, could we possibly do an artificial intelligence machine learning workshop? The answer is yes, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'd
yes,
love doing that.
Love to do that. So, if this is something that, bringing it back to your teams, your automation teams, your QA teams as a whole, doing something in the way of a formal workshop, we absolutely can do that. So that's another thing. Again, this is Kirk Walton. You can email me at kwalton@tapqa.com. You can come out to our website, tapqa.com. Definitely. This is the sort of thing we love to do. So yeah, we would certainly be able to do that.
Well, yeah, and remember, we also do that free 1-hour consultation too. So if you're not sure if your current setup is AI ready or whatever you want to call it, absolutely, you can reach out and we would love to consult on it.
So yeah, 100%. We'd love to do that. So more questions, and we welcome as many questions as you have. This has been probably the best Q&A session I think we've ever had in a webinar. So this is great. How does the convolutional neural network model classification work for AJAX and complex elements from your experience? And then do DOM trees with thousands of elements, how does that behave?
Right. So convolutional neural networks. So remember what convolutional neural networks are. They're basically you're passing images of your icon to it. So you're not calling background code when you're actually calling these. You're actually telling it to, you would handle your element selection the same as you always would with via Selenium or whatever you're using. But the convolutional neural network side of it is basically you're passing the images of the icons. So you say you have a about us, a menu, the little hamburger that I always forget the name of, and you pass that to the convolutional neural network. And what that does is it's just an image. It's not like, it doesn't care that it's, you know, what type of UI or whatever type of call it is in the background. It only cares that it's finding that the image, or the element based off of what's passed to the model. So in that scenario, it wouldn't really, the way that you select it wouldn't really change. What would change is how you're, the element that you're targeting and how you target that element.
Okay.
I hope that answers that.
Sure, sure. Is there any tool that can be integrated to capture the output for reporting? You know, one that's being used by this individual is Tableau, some other internal tools for reporting purposes. But when they implement AI, the reporting part can be integrated as well within the same framework as they follow today. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a possibility.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for tools?
For reporting?
Yeah, and that's something that, you know, actually, you know, as part of our consulting services, I mean, we build tools like that. I mean, we could certainly,
Sure.
you know, look at building a, you know, something in the way of a platform for that or a tool for that. But is there anything that's just like a quick, easy, you know, easy hit or anything?
Well, I would have to look up. I don't have anything on the top of my head right now. I'm blanking on it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sure. No, yeah, no worries. No worries. Can you provide an example for where AI could be used in a data-driven or hybrid framework other than DOM maintenance, et cetera?
Sure. So again, like if you were doing a data-driven scenario, you would use like reinforcement learning. So that would be an option, obviously. Reinforcement learning would basically be your data driver. So you would, it would find the best path. So say we have like a login page and then we have a cart. It would find the best path to the login page, and it would generate multiple paths to get to the cart. So in that scenario, you're driving it using the data that the reinforcement learning has learned. So that's probably the one way that I would go with a data-driven scenario. It would probably, I would start with reinforcement learning. Again, there's a multitude of these types of machine learning and deep learning techniques. So don't just focus in on, or like when you leave here, like obviously convolutional neural networks is a great intro to getting AI in your Selenium, and reinforcement learning is actually fantastic for test coverage, but expand and look out too, because there's additional avenues that you can take with machine learning techniques and different types of neural networks that can also assist you with getting that. But with data-driven, my first thought would be to go with reinforcement learning to get the multiple paths to the, just to generate the multiple test cases.
Okay. Have you used it with Android Studio or Xcode?
Android Studio and Xcode. I have not used it with Android Studio and Xcode. Right now, my focus has been on web, but no, I could definitely see it working in that scenario, mainly because again, you can use a page object model. So instead of you would just probably use Java, and you would load it via that. But no, I mean, like I said, it's really obviously the ideal language to like pick up is Python, because I don't know why, but that's the chosen language for machine or for AI related items. But for Android Studio specifically, or XEUI test or whatever you're trying to run for iOS, it's still a bit down to the framework that you're using, right? So if you're using page object model, you'd still do a similar scenario with that, right? I don't know why I said right, like I was asking him, he responded, but.
Right. Just to elaborate on earlier question, the framework that's used, and this was for, again, the question that we were talking about frameworks. Framework they use is custom written in Python. It has page object models for the product they're testing and a computer vision module, OpenCV. The OpenCV module on its own is not finding the elements. They pass on to various screen sizes on devices due to the orientation and scaling of those screens. Can AI handle this scenario?
It can. So you have to look at how you handle your model though. So when you generate your AI model, you'd have to be specific to what the sizes, because any variation. So the way that the downsampling and everything works is that it downsamples it to the same size, and the way the convolutional neural networks work is that you send it a specific size. So if you have grayscale images or RGB images that are going through, you want to make sure that you're setting up your layers properly in the middle to handle that variation. So it can handle it. The answer is yes. The answer to your issue, if you were doing it via like an AI model, like convolutional, you would want to tweak your model.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answered that question. Since data is everything for AI implementation, do we have to exclusively take care of input data, like external data sheets, while integrating Selenium with AI?
So yeah, so again, it's in two parts, right? So the first part is when you're actually generating the model that you're going to consume by your Selenium. So there is a portion where you're going to have a model that you want to maintain. So you'll have like a data set of thousands of images that you'll want to maintain, and that's just to improve your accuracy. And again, those images need to be like different or differential. There has to be changes in it and nonlinear. But yeah, I think there's definitely a data maintenance scenario for that on the model generation side. On the integration to Selenium, after that model's created, there's really the only updates you do to the data set is to obviously to improve your accuracy. You would add more data to the data set and then regenerate the model. So the answer is yes on the model side, and not really on the Selenium side. Sorry.
And then just one last question, and again, if there are others, I mean, please feel free. We'll take this one and then try to wrap up. But does generating a model require any need for source code application changes?
No. So well, when it comes down to convolutional neural networks, it doesn't, because what you're doing is you're generating that model. You can look at that as a outside, like its own like testing project. So if you look at like a general Selenium project is usually external from the main project. It could be included in there, but it's still a separate project included in the repo. So that's what I would look at the model generation as. So it would be its own external, or it could be inside the repo, but its own project that's generated. So you don't have to update your source code to do anything. The only thing that you could get into a scenario where you want to run reinforcement learning off of your logs or something like that to be able to generate test cases off of your logs. That's a scenario where you'd want to be able to tie into your log system. But other than that, I don't think source code changes would be that necessary, depending on how integrated you want to get.
Okay. And Mike, once again, just it might be helpful to share that last or second to last slide with contact info and just how folks can follow up with us. Again, how we can help with again, putting together a workshop like was asked before, or just helping to create a strategy to incorporate AI to maximize your current testing team efforts. You can reach out to me. I'm Kirk. Certainly Mike. I think both of our emails are now on that slide. So we'll wrap up with just any other questions. We do have one more. And that is just, what are the popular Python libraries available to create AI and ML models in Selenium?
Sure. So I'll back up to the open source libraries. So obviously TensorFlow is the most popular right now. That's what I would suggest utilizing, mainly because of the documentation, right? When you're getting into something that appears complicated from the outside, it's super important to get the right documentation. And Google's done a fantastic job handling that. But Keras is obviously an option as well. But TensorFlow in general, there's different libraries for different languages, so that'd probably be a fairly good option to go with. Because what you'll see a lot is when you Google these tutorials, you'll run across a lot that are written in Python. Again, that's just whoever chose Python was the one, that was the one. But there's also equivalences to these libraries in C# and Java and other languages as well. So that would be my advice, is to look up TensorFlow and that's.
Okay, great. Well, again, we'd like to thank everyone. And yes, we will be sending out the recording to everyone. It takes some time to process. So it'll either be today or tomorrow. It'll be either myself or Scott from our team that'll be sending that out. And really want to thank you all again for being here. I know taking the time out of your daily schedule, and certainly a lot of us, of course, are now working from home. And on behalf of everyone at TapQA, we're hoping that everyone's staying safe. And obviously, this is a unusual time for everyone, and hope everyone is staying safe. And anything that again TapQA can do to help, just let us know. But most importantly, just hope everyone is adjusting to the way of doing things, and again staying safe and healthy. That's the most important thing. So, Mike, any last thoughts on your end?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining in today on the conversation. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and again, a very active Q&A session. So very much thank everyone for that. And, just one more question that we had, Mike, the compatibility of TensorFlow with C#.
Yeah, so there's a number of different libraries you can use. I would look into ml.net as well if you're talking specifically C#. That's a great machine learning library. But I'll have to look into full compatibility with TensorFlow. I know there was a conversion going on, but I don't know where it's at right now. So if you want to reach out to me personally, I can help you with that, or like point you in the right direction.
Sure, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks again, Mike, and again, to everyone else, stay safe. Have a great rest of the week and a great weekend. And thanks again for being here at our webinar today. Appreciate it.